The endless stretch of deep space was a canvas of cold, distant stars, stretching to infinity, as the Solitude drifted silently through the void. Aboard the exploration ship, the hum of the engines was a constant, soothing reminder that they were moving forward, even if it felt like they were standing still. Captain Samuel Gray sat in the bridge, eyes fixed on the viewport, watching the endless black. A year into this mission, and every day felt the same. Still nothing out there, Captain. Commander Sarah Wainwright's voice was a mixture of annoyance and humor, as she checked the communications panel. Not even a rogue asteroid. We're about as exciting as a space parking lot. Gray gave her a small smile, his fingers tapping restlessly on the console. He didn't mind the silence, the lack of discoveries. He craved the vast emptiness of space. He had dreams of finding the next big thing, something to make his career, something to make history. The crew was skeptical, but he believed in the whispers of deep space. "There's always something out there," he replied, his voice tinged with that usual unshakable optimism. "Maybe we'll get lucky." Lucky? "We're a few hundred light-years from anything even remotely interesting, Captain. You know that." She was right, of course. The Solitude had been sent to the outskirts of known space to survey regions believed to be barren. No habitable planets, no promising stars. Just empty space. But Captain Gray was obsessed with one particular patch, an anomaly at the edge of a system near the eclipse belt, a region long thought to be devoid of life. The coordinates showed no planets, no moons. Just dust, except now, as he stared at the sensor readings, he saw something. Something new. A small, unlisted planet, just on the edge of the belt. Well, Gray muttered, his hand flying over the controls. "Seems the anomaly's a little more interesting than we thought." Wainwright raised an eyebrow. "You're not seriously thinking of, get the crew ready," Gray cut her off, a grin pulling at his lips. "I think we've found our new destination." The Solitude changed course, a faint rumble vibrating through the hull as the ship's engines shifted direction. The rest of the crew didn't share the captain's enthusiasm. They were tired, used to the monotonous silence, and most of them saw the detour as a waste of time. The planet was uncharted, almost certainly barren. Yet, as the ship moved deeper into the system, the sensors continued to light up, more and more readings from the surface of the planet itself. "Captain," Wainwright said, her voice sharper now. "This doesn't add up. The readings are strange. There's an unnatural energy signature. It doesn't fit any of our models." Gray's grin widened. He knew what this meant. He wasn't just chasing history now. This was something new. Something important. By the time they descended through Tressa's thick atmosphere, the excitement had reached a fever pitch. Despite the skepticism, there was an undeniable thrill in the air. The landing was smooth, the craft touching down in a vast, green forest, filled with strange plant life. The planet was alive in a way no one had expected. When the doors of the ship opened, the first thing that hit them was the smell. It wasn't like anything they'd experienced before, an overwhelming mix of damp earth, fresh growth, and something else, something faintly metallic. They stepped out cautiously, boots crunching on the soft, mossy ground. "You'd think we found a garden," Lieutenant Rachel Huang said, her voice muffled by her helmet. "I don't know if garden is the right word," Wainwright muttered, scanning the surroundings. The forest stretched out before them, thick with towering trees and dense, bulbous plants that emitted soft pulses of light. It was like walking into a living, breathing organism. "Let's stick to the basics," Gray said, the enthusiasm never leaving his voice. "We take samples, we map the area, and we send the data back to Earth." The crew split into two teams, one for resource extraction, the other for biological sampling. Huang and Wainwright headed into the jungle with the biological team, their equipment humming as they analyzed the strange flora. The trees were massive, like nothing they'd seen before. The leaves seemed to move when they weren't looking directly at them, like they were aware of the human's presence. "Look at this," Huang said, kneeling beside a particularly thick vine. It's got something in its core, almost like a neural node. Wainwright squinted. You think it's alive? Like, sentient? Maybe, Huang replied, pulling out her analysis tool. It's definitely reacting to my touch. Before Wainwright could respond, something strange happened. The vine, which had been stationary, began to wriggle. It stretched out toward Huang, wrapping around her leg with surprising speed. Rachel! Wainwright shouted, reaching for her, but it was too late. The vine tightened, pulling Huang into the ground. Her shrieks echoed through the forest, but the earth seemed to swallow her, as if the planet itself was devouring her. The team scrambled to free her, but the vine was strong. Huang's helmet cracked as the pressure increased, and the crew finally managed to sever the vine with their tools, dragging her out. She was shaken, gasping for breath, and pale as a ghost. Are you all right? Wainwright asked urgently. I think so, Huang stammered. Her eyes were wide, her voice unsteady. It was like the ground was alive. It was watching me. Gray, who had arrived at the scene, looked down at the ground. The plant had retreated into the soil, its leaves still flickering with an eerie light. This planet isn't like anything we've seen before, Wainwright said, her voice low, a sense of unease creeping into her words. No kidding, Gray muttered, his voice no longer light. But we need to keep going. We're just getting started. They continued their survey, but the tension was palpable. The once peaceful forest now felt unnervingly alive. Trees seemed to bend slightly, their branches curling toward the crew, and the air was thick with strange whispers. The deeper they went into the jungle, the more it felt like the planet itself was aware of their presence, watching them, waiting. As the day wore on, the crew began to experience odd phenomena. Devices malfunctioned without explanation. The temperature fluctuated wildly, and every so often, an unexplainable electrical charge would surge through the air. It wasn't long before the crew realized something much darker was at play. Back on the ship, the sensors began to glitch as well, with strange energy readings coming from the surface. We need to leave, Wainwright insisted, her voice rising with urgency. Gray's eyes narrowed. We can't leave yet. We've barely scratched the surface of what's here. But as night fell, the situation grew more dangerous. The trees seemed to loom closer, their shapes distorting in the dim light. The ground began to hum softly underfoot, as though something was shifting beneath the surface. Then the real twist happened. A flash of blinding light erupted from the center of the forest. The air crackled with static, and in the blink of an eye, the crew's communication equipment was wiped out. Their radios went dead. The planet wasn't just alive, it was actively interfering with their technology. Captain, Wainwright's voice crackled through the static. Something's out there. It's like the whole planet is evolving. Gray didn't know what to think. But one thing was clear, they weren't alone. The air was thick with static. The crew's communication systems had gone completely silent, and the eerie stillness of Tress seemed to press down on them, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Gray stood motionless, staring out at the vast stretch of the jungle beyond, now barely visible under the pale light of their torches. The trees no longer seemed just like trees. The once distant whispers, which could have been dismissed as the wind, now sounded unmistakably like a chorus of voices, faint but growing stronger. What the hell just happened? Wainwright demanded, her voice cutting through the silence. Her normally steady composure was frayed at the edges, and Gray could see her hands shaking as she checked her equipment again. It was useless, completely dead. Something's blocking us, Gray said grimly, his eyes narrowing as he glanced around. The planet. It's reacting to us. To our presence. Damn right it's reacting, she muttered, kicking the ground in frustration. The dirt beneath her boot seemed to ripple, like a living thing, and she pulled her foot back quickly, startled by the sensation. It's not just blocking us, it's changing the environment around us. How are we supposed to fight that? We're not fighting it, Gray replied, his voice steady, almost calm in contrast to the tension in the air. We're studying it. We're learning. That's the only way we get out of this. We need answers. You think we're just going to learn our way out of this? Wainwright snapped. You're out of your mind. Focus, Sarah, Gray said sharply, his eyes still scanning the trees. He wasn't looking at her, but at the forest beyond, where something had shifted. A patch of trees just to the left had moved, bending and swaying in a way that was not possible for wind to explain. We can't let this break us. We need to stay calm. Just then, there was a sound, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate from deep within the planet. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur. The trees around them bent in a slow, deliberate arc, as though bowing in response to something that was about to emerge. Gray's heart raced, but he forced himself to keep calm. Something was coming, from the shadows of the forest. There was a shift, something moving, skittering, too fast to catch. The creatures of Tress had been the talk of the crew before, but now they were no longer theoretical. The ground churned and warped, as if it was alive, but it wasn't just the land that was changing. The plants, those strange, pulsating forms, had begun to rearrange themselves, growing and retracting in what seemed like a preternatural rhythm. And the air smelled different now. It was richer, thicker, alive with some kind of chemical fragrance that clung to their skin like a film. We need to get to the ship, Wainwright urged, her voice tense, but Gray held up his hand to stop her. No. Not yet. We need to understand what's happening here first. He had no idea what was truly going on, but the thought of retreating felt wrong. Tress had already shown itself to be something more than just a planet with strange plants and animals. There was a purpose to all of this, something deeper than any of them could comprehend. He needed answers. Understand what? Wainwright asked, her voice rising with frustration. The whole damn planet's fighting back. There's no understanding this. It's like trying to figure out how to negotiate with an angry god. Gray turned to face her fully, his gaze hardening. If this planet's alive, then it has a purpose. And I'm not leaving without finding out what that is. Before Wainwright could respond, there was a noise behind them, soft at first, like the sound of leaves brushing together, but then it grew louder. A deep, guttural sound, like something breathing, something large and close. Gray's instincts kicked in, his body going tense. He motioned for the team to keep quiet and still. They heard it now too, a low growl, not quite animal, but undeniably real. It was coming from somewhere within the forest, from behind the strange trees that seemed to pulse with light. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he felt the presence of something. Watching them, a shape emerged from the undergrowth, a creature unlike anything they'd ever seen before. It was tall, nearly 10 feet in height, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend in impossible ways, its body covered in smooth, shimmering skin. But what struck Gray first were the eyes, large and black, like holes in its face, voids of nothingness, yet they seemed to shimmer with intelligence. The creature's body was semi-translucent, with faint glows running through its veins, like the veins of the plants around them. The creature stared at them without blinking, its head tilting slightly as if studying them, its dark eyes unblinking, its posture unnervingly calm. Then, the creature opened its mouth. A pulse of light shot from its throat, a deep, resonating hum that filled the air, vibrating through their bones. It was not a roar, not a sound of aggression, but a command. It was as if the planet itself was speaking through the creature, ordering them, sending a message that was beyond their understanding. The pulse grew stronger, and the trees around them began to shift, their branches intertwining, growing closer and closer, trapping them in a cage of living wood. Gray's heart thudded. The planet wasn't just aware of them, it was in control. And the creature was its messenger. Everyone, back to the ship. Now, Wainwright ordered, her voice sharp with urgency, but Gray couldn't move. His eyes were locked on the creature, mesmerized by its gaze. Something inside him told him not to leave, and not yet. They were so close. He had to understand what was happening. Captain, Wainwright's voice broke through his thoughts. We need to move now. This planet, it's not just alive, it's sentient. It's been watching us." "I know," Gray said, his voice low. The realization hit him with the force of a wrecking ball. Tress wasn't just an alien world. It wasn't just an ecosystem. They had been wrong about everything. The planet had been waiting for them, watching them long before they arrived. Its evolution had been carefully tailored to their presence. Every step they had taken had been watched, measured, and, it seemed, guided. The creature stepped forward, its limbs unfolding like a spider's legs, slowly and deliberately. Its eyes glowed brighter as it moved closer, and the pulse of light coming from its mouth intensified, filling the air with an electric charge that made the crew's skin tingle. "Sarah," Gray's voice was barely a whisper. "I think this is it. This is the heart of Tress." The realization was as terrifying as it was awe-inspiring. The planet's heart, its core of intelligence, had manifested before them. But was it a force of nature to be studied, or was it something far more dangerous? As the creature reached them, it paused, just a few feet away. The air grew heavy, thick with tension. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature retreated into the forest, blending with the shadows, its form dissolving into the thick undergrowth. The trees returned to their previous stillness, but the hum of energy in the air lingered. The ground beneath their feet still trembled, though more faintly now. The planet was watching them, and the crew was no longer just explorers. They were intruders, and Tress would not allow them to forget that. "Let's go," Wainwright said, her voice grim. She turned away from the spot where the creature had stood, signaling for the others to follow. But Gray stood still for a moment longer, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the creature had been. Tress was alive. And it was not done with them yet. They reached the ship in silence, the forest behind them still pulsating with that strange, almost melodic hum. The crew filed into the airlock, their boots thudding heavily on the metal floor as the tension wrapped around them like a thick, suffocating blanket. Gray led the way, his face set, eyes focused ahead, but his mind was racing. He couldn't shake the image of the creature the way it had stood there, motionless, and watched them. It wasn't just observing them, it had been communicating. He could feel it in his bones. Wainwright was at the comm station almost before the airlock sealed. "We need to report this," she said, her voice taut with frustration. "I don't care if the whole damn system's out of range, we need to send something back to Earth, anything." "No," Gray interrupted, shaking his head as he passed by her. "We don't report anything yet. We don't know enough. Not yet." "Captain, are you serious?" Wainwright's voice was incredulous, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You saw what just happened. That thing was alive, Samuel. The planet is alive, and it's toying with us. We need to get the hell out of here before it decides we're not worth the trouble." Gray turned slowly to face her, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had never been this uncertain, but the truth of the situation was clear now. Whatever was happening on Tress was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. It wasn't just a dangerous ecosystem, it was a force, a consciousness that was older, smarter, and more powerful than they had imagined. Leaving was no longer an option. "We can't leave, Sarah," Gray said quietly. "Not until we understand what it wants." Wainwright looked at him for a long moment, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. The crew had already begun to fall into their own hushed conversations, murmuring in small groups, none of them quite knowing what to say. The planet had done something to them, something more than just unsettling. It had changed the rules. And now, the solitude felt like a fragile thing adrift in a storm of uncertainty. "We need to secure the ship," Wainwright said after a moment, her voice steady again. "If those things are somehow controlling the environment out there, we're vulnerable. It might not be safe to stay here long." Gray nodded slowly, watching her turn back to her console. He understood her reasoning, but something gnawed at him. There was more to Tress than they had seen, more to the strange, shifting creatures and the living forest. It was as if the planet was some kind of puzzle, and the key to solving it lay at the heart of its strange, self-sustaining system that he could almost feel it calling to him. "We need to know what's at the center of this," he said to no one in particular. "We need to find the source." Wainwright shot him a sharp look. "You mean the source of the intelligence? The center of the life cycle?" Gray paused, looking out the viewport toward the wild, glowing jungle beyond. He had no answers, only instincts now. The images of the creatures, their cold, black eyes, and that low pulse of energy, they were all pieces to a larger puzzle. "Yeah," he replied. "The heart of Tress." It was a long night. The crew worked in tense silence, securing the ship as best they could. They ran diagnostics, checked the perimeter, and made sure every system was functioning. But it was like fighting a shadow. Everything was in place, but something invisible, intangible, was moving just out of reach. The planet was still there, out beyond the ship's hull, alive, watching. Gray didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in the command chair, staring out at the dark expanse of Tress. The stars beyond seemed so distant, so unimportant now. Everything in the universe felt far away, as if the planet itself had pulled them into its orbit, drawing them closer with every passing second. They weren't just explorers anymore. They were intruders in a place that had been waiting for them. As the hours dragged on, something began to change. It was subtle at first. A hum in the ship's systems. A flicker in the lights. The faintest vibration underfoot, as though the ship itself was being affected. Gray stood and walked to the observation window, peering out into the dark jungle beyond. The trees were moving again, but this time, they weren't swaying in the wind. They were shifting, pushing forward, almost as if trying to come closer to the ship. "No," Gray muttered under his breath. The plants were reacting to them, as if they were the prey. The entire ecosystem, it seemed, was moving closer, as if the planet was closing in on them. He rushed to the comm station where Wainwright had been working, eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Sarah, get the crew ready. We need to move. Now." Wainwright looked up, her face pale. "It's already started," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The planets, it's coming for us." Before Gray could respond, the alarm went off, its shrill sound cutting through the tension like a knife. The ship shuddered, the lights flickering again as the hull seemed to groan under the pressure. Something was attacking the Solitude. He didn't know how, but the planet had found a way inside. The jungle outside had responded to their presence, and now it was going to make sure they couldn't leave. He dashed to the cockpit, Wainwright following closely behind. The view outside had changed. Where there had been only trees and shadows, there was now a surge of plant life rushing toward them, vines thick as ropes, roots twisting and digging into the soil beneath the ship. The ground around the landing site was alive, moving like a living creature, pushing against the hull of the Solitude. "Brace for impact," Gray ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The Solitude lurched, the shaking growing more violent as the ship's hull creaked in protest. He could hear the sound of something, roots? Tendrils? Scraping against the metal, trying to break in. Wainwright slammed her hand down on the emergency controls, locking down every hatch and securing the ship as best she could. But even that wasn't enough. The pressure from the outside was growing too intense, too fast. "Captain, we've lost control," Wainwright shouted, her eyes wide with panic. "It's the planet, it's taking us down." Gray's mind raced. They were losing the battle, and fast. There was no time to waste. The planet wasn't just attacking them, it was pulling them in, forcing them to stay. "Get the crew to the escape pods," Gray said, his voice sharp. "Now. We can't afford to wait any longer." But as the crew rushed toward the escape pods, Gray turned back toward the viewport one last time. He couldn't leave yet. Not without understanding what was at the core of this world. The creature, the pulse of energy, the sentient forest, all of it was part of something far greater, something connected to the very heart of Tress. And as the ship's hull groaned and buckled under the strain, Gray knew one thing for certain: if they were going to survive, they would have to face Tress head-on. The Solitude began to fall. The Solitude buckled violently as the ship's outer hull was battered by the relentless force of Tress's ecosystem. Vines, thick as steel cables, coiled around the landing struts, pulling with enough strength to rip the ship free from the ground. The shaking intensified, a gut-wrenching roar from the ship's metal frame echoed through the corridors. Gray grabbed the edge of the console, knuckles white, and stared at the viewport, unable to tear his gaze from the growing chaos outside. "This is it," Wainwright said from behind him, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms blaring throughout the ship. "It's not just attacking us, it's pulling us under." The forest outside was alive in every sense of the word. The trees were no longer just trees, they were moving, twisting, and reshaping, their trunks splitting open to reveal dark, cavernous holes from which more vines and tendrils emerged, seeking them, pushing toward the ship with horrifying intent. The ground beneath them seemed to be liquefying, as though the planet's surface itself was coming alive, trying to pull the Solitude into the very soil. Gray's heart hammered in his chest as he looked around at his crew, each one scrambling in the tight corridors, fear etched in their faces. They were no longer just fighting an alien world, they were fighting for their survival against something that was actively trying to consume them. The ship's systems flickered erratically, the lights flashing on and off, making it feel as though they were being swallowed by darkness, one piece at a time. "Is there any way to regain control?" Wainwright demanded, leaning over the controls. Gray shook his head, teeth clenched. "The systems are shot. We've lost everything. There's nothing we can do." "What do we do then?" she asked, her voice rising with desperation. "We can't just sit here and die." Gray didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. In the last few minutes, he had come to a horrible conclusion: they weren't just fighting the planet. The planet was acting. It wasn't a random disaster. It was a conscious act of aggression. A message. It had been aware of their presence long before they'd even arrived. Every step, every decision, had been anticipated. "This isn't just a survival situation," he said slowly. "We need to understand what it wants. There's something at the center of this. Something driving it." "What the hell are you talking about?" Wainwright shot back, her voice trembling. "The planet's trying to eat us. We need to get out, not figure out its deep meaning." "I know," Gray said, turning back to the viewport, his gaze unwavering as he watched the vine strain against the ship's hull, stretching toward the airlock. He could almost hear them whispering in the air, like a faint, alien language, calling them. "But if we don't understand it, we're going to die here. And if we die here, this planet will just keep doing this to anyone else who comes." Wainwright glanced back at the crew, who were frantically preparing the escape pods. She hesitated, clearly torn, then nodded slowly. "Fine. You've got 10 minutes. But if we're still stuck here in 10 minutes, we're getting out, and you're coming with us." Gray nodded, grateful for the small amount of time she was giving him. 10 minutes. That was all he had. It wasn't much. He turned, pushing past her and heading toward the forward cargo bay, the only part of the ship that wasn't entirely compromised by the planet's assault. He needed to reach the data systems. He had to know more. It was the only way. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in the ship's data archives that could give him a clue. Something they hadn't found during their initial scans. He reached the cargo bay and immediately began accessing the ship's core systems. The screen flickered and buzzed as the ship's damaged system sputtered, but after a few seconds, the data began to load. The deep space scans they'd done before landing, the initial analyses of the planet's atmosphere and ecosystem, it was all here. He scrolled through it feverishly, but nothing stood out. Nothing that explained the behavior of the planet, or the creature. He wasn't sure how long he'd been working when the low hum began again, distant at first, but growing steadily louder. He could feel the vibrations through the floor, see the ripples in the data streams. It wasn't just the planet now, it was the heart of the planet. The source of its power. It was closing in on them, pulling them into its grasp. His body was urging him to leave, to run with the others, but something inside kept him rooted to the spot. It was like he could hear a voice soft, barely a whisper calling him. Not in any language he understood, but a deep, pulsing hum, resonating in his bones. A sudden blinding flash of light filled the room, making him stagger back. The data console went black, and for a moment, he was plunged into total darkness, and then, there it was. A surge. A burst of energy. A vision, Gray gasped, his mind spinning as he tried to process what was happening. He saw the planet before. Not the tress they'd landed on, but a time when the ecosystem was still forming. He saw vast, sprawling jungles, and creatures, some like the one they'd encountered earlier, but others were far more alien, more mechanical, as though their forms were hybridized with technology. Their movements were deliberate, not just biological but intentional. The planet had been building itself, adapting to each new challenge, evolving toward an ultimate purpose. In the vision, he saw something else. Something that wasn't just a living creature or a force of nature, it was something aware. An intelligence, vast and cold, pulsing at the center of Tress. It was the true heart of the planet. A consciousness that had been forming, not over centuries, not millennia, but eons. It was watching. It had been watching them all along, studying their every move. The flash of light died down, and Gray stumbled backward, blinking as the room returned to normal, the buzzing of alarms still echoing through the ship. The creature was here. The force at the center of Tress. It had made itself known to them, but now, Gray understood. The planet didn't just want to kill them. It didn't just want to chase them off. It was trying to connect with them, to pull them into its fold. Tress wasn't hostile. It was testing them. If they wanted to survive, they would have to prove themselves worthy of understanding. The ship shook again, harder this time, the walls groaning under the pressure. Time was running out. Gray took a deep breath and stood up straight. He had his answer. Without looking back, he walked toward the airlock, his steps purposeful. He had no idea what awaited him out there, but he couldn't leave the ship yet, not when there was still so much to learn. Wainwright and the others were already at the escape pods, looking at him with expressions of confusion and worry. "We need to get out now, Captain," Wainwright said, urgency in her voice. "This ship is going down." But Gray's eyes were fixed on the jungle beyond, the now glowing trees, the creeping vines. He couldn't run anymore. "No," he said, his voice steady. "We're not leaving." Wainwright's eyes narrowed. "You're out of your mind. We have to leave now, or we die." "I'm not going to die." Gray turned toward the pods, his face hardening. "We're going to face this. Together." The jungle outside seemed to agree. The trees shifted again, bending in the air like sentient creatures reaching toward the ship, pulling them in. Gray stepped forward, toward the door, the first of many questions finally answered. But Tress wasn't done yet. It was still testing them, still watching, and the true heart of Tress awaited the end.